Okay guys, so this tutorial here is going to be how to implement a 100% hands-free gulp build workflow. I know that's a mouthful, but I'll go through each piece and I will help you guys build that up start to finish. This diagram I made here is kind of showing the workflow that we're going to be working with. This might be a simplified example, but for the most part this is how the gulp workflows tend to work. There are other build flow tools such as Grunt that do similar things. Personally, I like gulp, but if you guys look at this flow here, you see, we have a site called example.com. When a user requests www.example.com, that gets sent to some origin web server, and that could be Nginx, Apache, Node, or any other web server software. And we want that web server to pull assets, to pull content from a distribution folder. A distribution folder is going to house our content in an easily digestible format or in an efficient method. The whole point of using something like gulp is to help bridge the gap between a performant website and a developer's needs in terms of legible code and that sort of thing. So a distribution folder is going to house assets such as JS, CSS, or HTML, but we want those assets to be ready for production. And what that means is we want, for instance, our JavaScript to be minified, perhaps obfuscated. We want our CSS to be minified. We want our HTML to ideally be minified. We want white space to be removed. If we have several CSS files, maybe we want to concatenate them into a single file in order to reduce the number of HTTP requests that are going to be issued by our website. See, there's a whole host of factors that play into a site's performance, and you can use a third-party tool such as like pageloadtester.com or something like that, and that'll tell you, it'll rate your website in terms of performance, but it'll also tell you things that you can improve. And the biggest improvements in terms of reducing overhead are usually things like file concatenation, which is if I have 10 JavaScript files, maybe I can concatenate it into a single file so I don't have to make 10 requests. Same for CSS. And then also minification, which is changing the variable names, reducing white space. We could do full-on compression whereby the code gets rendered into, it gets compiled into a format that's the most efficient. But it's really no longer legible to the developer at that time. So if you were to look at the content in a distribution folder, it really should not be very legible because it's going to be zero white space, concatenated, obfuscated, minified. You wouldn't be able to work out of this content. It's really just to make it easy on the network, but it makes it completely unreachable by the developer who might want to be doing development. So what we do is we create another folder called our development folder. And the development folder is going to have the same exact content as the distribution folder, but it's going to be in the format that the developer can work out of. That unminified code that might have comments, it might have white space, it might be messy. We'll have the 10 JavaScript files as opposed to the output of a single JavaScript file, or we'll have the several CSS files as opposed to just that single global CSS file. So what we're going to do is we're going to install gulp, and we're going to install a gulp watcher. And when we have the gulp watcher set up, we can just work out of our development folder, and anytime we make a change, it's going to get pushed to the distribution folder in real time. And we'll never have to worry about the distribution folder ever again. But when someone does request our website, example.com, they're getting the distribution content. So developers get to work out of the development folder, and everything looks pretty and they're happy. But the network and the page load is going to be indicative of the content in the distribution folder, because the gulp watcher is going to make sure that every time we touch something in the development folder, it gets transcomposed, or whatever you want to call it, compressed, and then put into the distribution folder. And that's actually what the network is going to serve back to the end user. So that's the flow. We'll set that up start to finish, and it's going to be a little bit of a lengthy process, but it's totally worth it. This is something we use, and it's incredibly valuable in my opinion. So step one is let's set up our website. Let's go to DigitalOcean and create a DigitalOcean droplet, and let's start creating our web server. You could use, CentOS or Ubuntu. This is going to be for Ubuntu, this example here. So Ubuntu, $5, New York 3, let's call it gulp. And we'll wait for that to be created. So again, it's just installing Ubuntu, and it's standing it up on a server. All right, so if I grab the IP and I go to that IP, what you can see here is there's no site standing up. We just get a refusal to connect. So that's what I would expect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to SSH into this gulp droplet here, and then we can start our development. So I'm going to come over to the terminal, SSH root at IP, and DigitalOcean emails you your login credentials. So I'm just going to check my email real quick, and I'm going to get that password. Okay, so I got my password. I'm going to enter it in here. And it's going to prompt me to change my password, but first I'm going to enter that existing password. And I'll enter a new password. And we are in. And you can see we have a standard Ubuntu installation here. So step one is let's set up our web server. You could use Apache, you could use Tomcat, whatever you want. I like Nginx, and that's what I'm going to use for the sake of this example here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to update the package manager. So let's just do apt get update. Okay, looking good. And then we'll do apt get install Nginx. Okay, so we just installed Nginx. Let's check to make sure it's there. It is, looking good. Okay, let's turn on our Nginx server. So I'm just going to do service reload Nginx. Oops. Service Nginx reload. Service Nginx restart. So that should set up a website at our IP here. So let's go back here. And this should set up a basic website. So what it gives us is the welcome to Nginx page. So we're now serving up HTML pages. If we take a look at the source, cool. So let's set up that folder structure that I was referencing for you guys in this image here. What I like to do is I like to create a public folder, and then from within the public folder we create the distribution folder. And the public folder is the development folder. So let's set that up. So I'm just going to go to our root here. I'm going to go make dir public. And now you can see we have that public folder. And then let's make our distribution folder. I'm just going to call it dist. Okay, so again, the public folder is going to be our development folder. And then when we make changes, we're going to push to the dist folder. And the dist folder is something we're never going to work out of, but that's actually what we want the web server to return content out of. So let's go ahead and create an index file in the distribution folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this file here, this welcome to Nginx file, into the distribution folder. And then I'm going to change the path so we're pointing to the distribution folder. So this file here, I know where that lives. I'm going to move it. So mv, it's var www html index. So that's the file that's being served up right there. And let's move it to public/dist. If we go into dist, we should see it now. Let's change the name. I don't like that long name. Let's just change it to index.html. Okay. And now we should get an error because the page is gone. Yeah, 403, because I just moved it. So now let's go into our Nginx config and point to our new destination. So in order to do that, we go into etc nginx sites enabled, and this is where our server setup is. So instead of pointing to where I had it before, var www html, let's just point to public/dist, and that should fix everything. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to once again do service nginx reload, and then I'm going to do service nginx restart. And now it's going to, the Nginx web server is going to look into that distribution folder when it wants to pull up content, and now it works again. So cool. So alright, web server is all taken care of. We have that all set, and we are serving up content from our distribution folder. Perfect. We are going to need actually, let's finish our folder hierarchy here. So in the distribution folder, we want a JS folder, and then we want a CSS folder. And then so you guys can see the distribution now has a CSS folder, an index file, and a JS folder. We want the same thing in our development folder, so in public here. So let's do make dir JS, make dir CSS. Okay, so again, we're going to work out of the public folder, but it's going to push everything to the distribution folder. So yeah, let's go ahead and install gulp. So I'm going to come over to the commands I have here, and so we're going to install gulp via Nodejs. So I'm going to take this command. So we are installing Node right now. Gulp works with Node, so. Alright, let's make sure we have it installed. We do, Node 4.5. So that's looking good. So let's install gulp. npm install save gulp install. let's see here. Let's just do npm install gulp. Okay, so you can see node modules was created. I think that might be sufficient. If we need to install like the developer version or save it globally or something, we can do that when we get to it, but it looks like it's installed. So what we want to do with gulp is we want to create a file called our gulp file. And then when you run the gulp command, it listens on the gulp file. So let's just do vim gulpfile.js, and we want this to be in our our development folder. So let's see here. Okay, so now we have a gulp file in there. So again, the gulp file is kind of like the config file. And it creates all the different tasks that you want gulp to run when some event occurs. So I already created our gulp file, so I'm going to pull that in. So, and I will go through what this all means. Okay, so let's just do vim gulp. Okay, so I'm pasting this all in. Let's see if I can run gulp. So gulp has a command just called gulp. Okay, does not seem to be installed. Let's try this. Okay, so to run gulp from the command line, you have to install an additional tool. I'll put that in the tutorial, so don't worry about that right now. And again, all the commands are in the tutorial on the blog post, so you could always reference back to that. Okay, so what this is saying is gulp actually ran, but when it ran the file, it couldn't find some of the modules. So let's go over the gulp file and I'll show you guys how this works. So there's a bunch of different modules that you can import that are available via npm. The ones that I find the most useful are uglify, minify CSS, and concat. Uglify is a minification tool for JavaScript. Minify CSS is the same for CSS, and the concat will take several files and concatenate it into a single file. Now there's much more you could do. You could do HTML minification, you could do like white space removal, you could do renaming. There's all different sorts of things you could do, but this is kind of the low-hanging fruit and sort of the most useful modules. So the way it works is we create a task, and the task watches for an event. And when the event occurs, it runs the gulp task. The main task is this default task, and that's the task that runs initially. But then when something occurs, we run these subtasks. So if we look in our default task here, gulp.watch CSS, and then minify CSS. What is this saying? This says, you know that CSS folder we created? If something changes in that folder, and that something ends in a .css, so if any CSS file changes, run the task minify CSS. And if we come up here, we see a task called minify CSS. And the task does a couple things. And if you look, it minifies the CSS, and then it pumps it out to the distribution CSS folder. And then we're doing the same exact thing for JavaScript. We look in the JavaScript folder, and if something changes, we run a task called scripts. What scripts does is, though, it concatenates a bunch of predefined files that I defined here, jQuery underscore, bootstrap, and backbone. It concatenates them into one file called base.js, and then it minifies that and it pumps it out to the distribution folder. So that's great as well. And then another thing we have here is we are listening on a main.js file. So these are libraries that we want to concatenate, but we're also going to have our own custom JavaScript file, and that's what I have here. I called it main. So if main changes, let's pump that out to the distribution folder JS. The JS distribution folder. So those are our three tasks. It's basically if CSS changes, minify it. If JavaScript changes, concatenate and minify it. And this is our our gulp kind of config file. And again, I'll put this on GitHub so you can play around with it, but you can create other tasks to do all sorts of things. We just find this to be the most useful here. So let's exit out of this, but what we want to do is see how we're importing all these modules. We need to install those modules via npm. So that's what I'm going to do here. So, and that's why it's giving us this error here, cannot find module. So let's just install all these. I'm running gulp again, it's giving us another error. Gulp minify CSS. So as you can see here, like there's other modules that maybe some of these have been deprecated, but you could find an equivalent module that does the same exact thing. So let's run gulp again. Still getting an error. Let's install gulp concat. Okay, let's try running gulp again. Oh, and it's finally running. So this is a running process, and what it's doing here is it's now listening. So I'm going to have to open up another shell terminal, and I will change one of the files, and we should see our tasks running. So let's do that. Okay, SSH root at, let's grab our IP. Okay, so this is the same box, but what I want to show you guys is because this session is running gulp, I'm going to use this session to actually make changes to a file. So if I go in, and again, this is the production folder, but if I go into JS and I create a file called main, there was that rule that said, hey, if main changes, then minify it and pump it out to the distribution folder. So let's see if that is true. So I'm just going to put some nonsense in here, and I'm going to save it, and we'll see if gulp picks it up. Okay, so I just saved some stuff to main, and it did not seem to pick it up. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, it did pick it up here. So what happened was I started gulp before the file even existed, and that created an issue. But gulp started, and you can see starting main, so it ran the scripts task and it also ran the main task. And if I go to my distribution folder, I should see it there. And there you see it, main. Now let's look at it. And you can see it's minified. It's minified and beautified. So that's great. So let's set up like a fake little website here, and we'll create the whole build flow. So you guys know I have that index file. But what I'm going to add is I'm going to reference some CSS and some JavaScript. So for the script, let's pull our main file in there. But let's also pull in a base file. And what the base file is, I told you guys that task with all the libraries that takes jQuery and backbone and underscore and concatenates those files into a single file. That file, I think we named it base. So let's double check here. Yeah, so it pumps it out and it calls it base.js. So we're going to reference base.js. So you guys see what we're doing. We're pulling in base.js and we're pulling in main.js. And this is all going to come from our distribution folder. But let's also pull in our CSS. And just for the sake of example, we'll use bootstrap.css. Okay, so I'm saving this, and let's load it and see what happens here. Okay, so bootstrap.css, it doesn't exist yet in the distribution folder, neither does base. Main should, and I think we forgot the subdirectory. So main actually should resolve. Yeah, and it does. So again, main looks like that. That's the garbage that we put in there. Base is not there yet. Bootstrap is not there yet. So for base and bootstrap, I'm going to FTP up those files. I have them locally. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to use FileZilla, and I'm just going to connect to this droplet here using SFTP. Okay, we should see our public. Yep, public. So I just want to pull in these files. So let's pull this up to CSS. And again, we're pulling these into development, into the development folder. And then gulp will take care of pushing them over to the distribution folder. So I'm uploading Bootstrap. Let's do the same for our JavaScript. Underscore jQuery bootstrap backbone. Cool. All right, let's see that that's all there. It is, looks good. So these files are actually all unminified. So if we take a look at, say, backbone, you can see there's tons of comments. It's unminified, tons of white space. So these we could work out of. If we wanted to actually make changes, we could, because it's not minified. This is legible, very well commented. It's great for development, but not so good for a performant website. So again, what is our gulp file going to do with those? It's going to, anytime it detects a change, it's going to take those files, concatenate them into a single file called base.js, and then that's going to be what we actually serve to end users. So let's start gulp again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just open up those files and make some changes so that all the tasks run and that everything gets pushed out to distribution. So let's go to first CSS. Okay, I'll just add some lines. I'll save that. So that should run. Yeah, so minify CSS just ran because it was listening and it heard that change that we just made. Now let's do the same thing for JavaScript. So I'll just go into jQuery, or you know what, let's go into main. Let's get rid of this because it's not even valid. We do console.log ran main. Save that. We should see the other tasks. Yeah, so scripts and main just ran too. So if I go to my website, all the files should now resolve because gulp was listening and it's pumping them out to the distribution folder. So let's see. All right, so why did it look different? Well, Bootstrap got pulled in. As you can see, it's minified and it's beautified and there's no white space. So this is great for production. Let's look at main, same thing, that ran, and you can see ran there in the console. And then instead of loading underscore, backbone, bootstrap, and jQuery, we just get this one file called base.js. And base.js is a concatenated, minified version of all of those files, which is beautiful. And this is very performant. We've reduced the HTTP request to just 3, and this is just going to be a smaller file altogether. It's going to be easier on the network, and we're going to have a very performant website. So I promised you guys a workflow where you won't have to deal with running gulp. And you guys can see if I'm in I don't have to go into the distribution folder anymore. If I want to write code and I have like my main file here, I can just do it, however I want. So let's just do an alert here. Code ran. So I just save that, and now I just reload the page, and that code gets pushed. So we no longer have to concern ourselves with minification or performance. It's all taken care of by gulp. Now the one caveat left is, well, we have gulp running in this terminal. And if we turn off, if I cancel this, the gulp listeners stop listening, and those changes that we make to the development folder are not going to get pushed to production. So there's one last thing we want to do, and that is we're going to add the gulp command to our startup file. So every time we log into an SSH terminal, gulp is going to start, and then we never have to worry about it again. So that's really easy. All we have to do is edit our bashrc file. And this is our startup file, so we're going to go to the bottom of it. And we're just going to append a couple lines. We will append these lines here. So this just navigates to the folder, and this starts gulp on silent and as a background process. So I'm going to save this, and bashrc changes don't propagate until you leave the terminal and relog in. So I'm going to log out, and then I'm going to relog in. Let's grab our IP here. Okay, so I just SSH'd into my box here. So, let's say I want to write some code. I'm going to go over to my JavaScript directory, and I have my custom JavaScript file, which is main here. And let's write a little line of code. So for var I equals 0, I is less than 10. I++, console.log I. Okay, so very simple line of JavaScript. I'm just going to save that. And let's see if it gets propagated to our publicly served website. And it does, 0 through 9. So we can work out of this unminified, commented JavaScript file, and it's still going to be performant on the front end here. So if we look over here at main.js, this is actually what we're serving. And this is the network efficient version. It's compressed, it's a smaller file, but we don't have to worry about all that stuff. Gulp just takes care of it in the background. And now we really don't have to concern ourselves with Gulp anymore unless we want to create new tasks or something. So that's all just taken care of. So this is a workflow that we use. It's awesome. You don't have to do new builds or anything. You just, Gulp is constantly listening in the background, and that's that. I hope that's helpful for you guys. So thanks.